Thomas, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Bjork.
Yeah, this is one of those podcasts where I feel like it could be like we shoot for an hour usually, but it could be like a 5 hour conversation. So I'll try and get through the like top 20% of what I want to talk to, but we won't be able to hit everything because your story is one that's really interesting for me personally. It kind of overlaps with a lot of areas of interest. So I know that I'm going to learn a lot as well. And just as a little tease before we press record, you had shared a couple stories of users of Airsubs who are making multiple thousands of dollars a month with the product. But we're going to use that. We're going to bury the lead, and we're going to talk about first the story of Airsubs, because I think your story of pivoting during global pandemic, which a lot of people have had to do, is an interesting one to talk about, because I think a lot of people have this question of like, when do I continue to grind on the idea that I think might be successful versus shifting depending on what I see happening within the world. So rewind me back to, let's say, January 2020, when life was a little bit more normal than what it is now. At that point, what were you working on, and what was the focus from a business perspective for you?
Yeah, definitely. So first, thanks so much for having me. What did life look like before the pandemic? So, yeah,
Hard to remember.
yeah, exactly. The Airsub story starts like about a year ago, right now in the beginning of the pandemic. And so
Hmm.
at the time, I was working on a startup, and like many other businesses in the pandemic, we were deeply affected. So
Hmm.
almost overnight, we went from having tens of thousands of users who really needed our product to a lot less.
Yeah.
And I remember it was during that 1 week in March when the pandemic really took hold in New York City.
Uh
And
huh. And you were in New York at the time.
yeah, I was in New York
Yep.
City, and the news was coming in waves, and it kind of felt like a big line of dominoes. So,
Yeah.
you know, first was, there's news coming from all over the world.
Uh huh.
There's this coronavirus that not many people know about. And then I felt like the first shoe dropped when Tom Hanks tested positive for COVID
Yeah. Totally.
in Australia, because it was just like this big figure that everyone knows.
Uh huh.
And they're like, oh man, if Tom Hanks can get it, then
If Tom Hanks can get it, I'm in trouble.
Ex-
Yeah.
exactly. And so then like that the NBA canceled their season, and
Yeah.
then the number of cases in New York.
Travel from China was closed off. It was
Exactly.
all in the same night, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
crazy. It was just sort of like this one night when everyone was kind of like glued to the TV or glued to their
Yes.
phone and checking Twitter. And so at the same time, like in the next couple days, I remember looking at a chart and I saw a 70% decline in our business,
Hmm.
in the main metric that we tracked, which was monthly
Mhm.
active users. And so, we were not alone. Businesses across the economy were affected, and there were
Yeah.
obvious ones that lost out, like restaurants. And then there were obvious winners, like grocery stores and e-commerce.
Yep.
And like many other people who were in our shoes, we pivoted because we had to,
Yeah.
and we launched a side project that's taken off and become Airsubs. And
Huh.
Airsubs helps people host live virtual events and earn money. And so, really like the first thing that we noticed that led us to the idea was that everything was shifting to be virtual. And so
Yeah.
anything that you were doing in person was now virtual. So if you were going to the office and not an essential worker, you're now working from home. If
Yep.
you were going to the gym, you're now working out at home on Zoom. If
Yep.
you were going to a restaurant, you're now buying groceries and you're cooking at home. And so, we started to see this make its way into the world of creators just generally, and then specifically food bloggers. And so
Yeah.
people were going live on Instagram and they were teaching things and getting people together, in a way that was pretty cool, but it was also still really hard. And so we
Mhm.
saw a food blogger teaching cooking classes on Instagram, and she was asking people to Venmo her with a donation for a ticket.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
And so we figured that there had to be a better way to get your community together virtually, and then also create a way for people to make money at a time when a lot of people were having a really tough go of it. And
Mhm.
so, we hacked together a product that made it really simple to host virtual events and earn money, and we launched it. And so we didn't know how it was going to go,
Yeah.
and we found someone who, she was already teaching some virtual classes and kind of like hacking it together manually, doing a lot of Instagram live and stuff. and she would get like, 20, 30 people together on a Zoom. And, we told her like, hey, we think we can help you scale this thing. We think we
Uh-huh.
can help you grow it up. And so we built this tool. We gave ourselves 72 hours to pull it together, and we launched it really quickly. And then in the first week, she hosted a class with 1,000 people together on Zoom,
Wow.
and which totally blew our mind. Like we were
Yeah.
looking at it and just constantly streaming through the pages of
Huh.
faces in Zoom. And in her first week, she made over $50,000 doing virtual events, which was many times more than any that
Yeah.
we'd ever made in a week,
Yeah.
never before.
And at that point for you guys as a business, you're like, there's definitely something here. Like if this one person can do it, then there's probably 100,000 people who can do it. We just need to get this in front of them.
Yeah, exactly. And so, your question before was about like when do you know, when to grind and when to pivot. And so, one of our investors was, he's seen a bunch of pivots. He was one of the first investors in Twitter, which was a pivot.
Sure.
He's one of the first investors in Lyft, which was also a pivot,
Yep.
and also one of the first investors in Twitch, which was a pivot.
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
you know,
And can you talk about each one of those? Because I think those, even like Instagram is a story where it was, I forget what it was, like bourbon, I think originally, but the idea being these companies start as something, Slack being another example, start as something, and then you realize they're not going to actually be the thing that you thought they were going to be when you first start, and you go in a different direction. What for each one of those, I think people would be curious to know. You had said Twitter, Lyft, and what was the last one?
Yeah, last one was Twitch. So,
Twitch. Yeah,
so I'll share each one of them what I know about it, and
sure.
I'm sure other people have like better versions of the
Yeah,
story, more
right.
accurate versions of the story. But as I understand it, Twitch, which is now a platform that helps people stream themselves as they're doing something,
Yep.
and a lot of video gamers use it. Like they'll stream their screen as they're playing a game with other people
Yeah.
on Twitch so that everyone can watch it. So that originally started as Justin TV and Social Cam. So
Hmm.
the original concept was, a live TV show that never ended. So
Yeah.
someone was walking around and they had a camera on their head, essentially.
Justin, and his name was Justin, and it was
Justin
Justin
Kahn.
TV. Yeah.
Yeah, and he would walk around, and it was like a live show all
Uh
the time.
huh.
And I think they realized at some point that there's a reason that shows are however long they are.
30,
Whether
30 minutes as opposed to 24 hours.
Yeah, exactly, because like all the in between moments are a little boring.
Super boring. You realize like how boring your life is when you live stream it 24/7.
Yeah, exactly. So I think they shifted from Justin TV to something called Social Cam. I don't actually know exactly what Social Cam was, but I think both
Yeah.
of those weren't working great. And then someone
Uh-huh.
on their
I
team,
think it was like a social network, like a video social network, almost like a Vine almost, if I remember right.
yeah,
So kind of in the similar space, but then eventually shifted. I didn't realize social cam then eventually shifted into Twitch.
yeah, or I think they like carved out, like they started working on Twitch on the side, and then at some point they carved it out and they sold Social Cam. But long
Yeah.
story short, they saw the things that they were working on weren't going to be very successful in the long run, and they found
Right.
something that was really working, and they were constantly experimenting on the side, and they found one thing and ran with it. And then, as far as Lyft goes, I think they started as essentially like a ride sharing
Uh-huh.
company. So it would be, I think it started at a college in upstate New York, and it was like Cornell, and the founders conceived of the idea of people getting together to hop in a car and drive down to New
Yeah.
York
Hey,
City.
we're all going to Boston or something. Like, let's all take a trip together if we're all going to the same place.
Yeah, exactly. And then I think they shifted it to be more of a concept of ride hailing, which
Uh-huh.
everyone's familiar with. It's like what Uber and Lyft do today. So it's sort of like
Yeah.
a derivative of what they were already doing, that they shifted to. And then Twitter, I think audio was the original concept, and I think
Oh yeah, that's right.
it had something to do with audio, but they also had this concept of like micro blogging, and then they
Sure.
kind of shifted into Twitter, which has had kind of this like amazing
Yeah.
evolution. So yeah, to the question of whether you should keep grinding or whether you should launch something and work on something new, it's a really hard question. And it's a really personal question because you hear both stories. You hear people
Yeah.
who really persevere and they were just on the other side. They
Uh-huh.
were right on the cusp of something amazing, and it was like that last little bit of effort that got them there.
Yep.
And then, there's also folks who, they let themselves follow, a path which is like really pulling them in that direction. And so
Yep.
I think the way that I think about it is, if you really are getting like pulled in a certain direction where it's like
Yep.
the only thing you can think about, or it's just like so obviously, um, you know, more interesting or better or more
Yeah.
helpful than what you're already doing.
Yep.
Like I definitely, I'd probably lean into it. That's how I think about it.
That's great. Yeah, there really is. There's not a science to it, right? There's not like an equation that you can apply to it that spits out the answer of if you should keep going or not. But I think some of the things that I'm guessing you'll talk about here can be indicators as to whether you should continue moving forward or not. Like, is the thing you're doing resonating with people? Like in its simplest form, whether it's content or a product, are you creating something that people are responding to positively or actually have positive outcomes from it? So I think helpful to kind of frame up the conversation moving into talking about Airsubs, but also I think a lot of people are thinking about that. If they've been working on something for a really long time, do I continue to do this and hope that like eventually I get that breakthrough moment? Or do I shift and pivot? And what I hear you saying is there isn't really a good answer. And it partly depends on the product and the thing you're working on, and it partly depends on who you are and what you want to be working on. Like, is it a good fit for you? Are you able to continue to do that for a long period of time? And are you getting kind of a response from people that indicates, hey, this is something that I'm kind of interested in? um,
Yeah.
so eventually you pivot. You were healthcare kind of focused before. Healthcare world really changes, and now you say, wait, there might be an opportunity here for us to work with creators. Everybody that listens to this podcast is in some way a creator. um, Tell me about that first initial success for somebody to create $50,000. You said in the first week, is that right?
Yeah.
How what did that look like, kind of start to finish? Is it somebody like who's really good at marketing, who had like a huge audience, and then what was it that they're selling, and how much did they sell it for?
Yeah. So first, it was a natural extension of what she was already doing. So she was
Hmm.
actually, our first user was actually a fitness instructor, and we've now
Uh-huh.
kind of seen the product evolve in such a way that it's really like taken hold in the community of food, and tons of
Hmm.
food bloggers, recipe developers, food photographers are using the product, and that's sort of a use case that's going incredibly well for us. But the first user ever was a fitness instructor. And
Sure.
so, she had a big but not massive following, and she had 25,000 Instagram followers. And she was already teaching fitness classes as part of a larger studio,
Yep.
which I think was Equinox. And
Sure.
so she had been teaching at Equinox for a little while, but had also been doing these classes on the side and had built
Uh-huh.
a little bit of a following on Instagram. And so, I think what really drove her to be successful, at least in the beginning, is that she was early, and
Yep.
then she was offering a product that people really loved.
Yep.
That people love.
Early, like in the pandemic, meaning like, hey, this was a unique offering related to the timing of when people needed to work out and they didn't have a solution.
Exactly. So she was
Yeah.
sort of early in the sense that she saw, hey, gyms are shutting down. I'm
Yep.
about to get furloughed or laid off, and
People have been sitting on their couch for a couple weeks and are starting to think like I need to exercise.
yeah, exactly. And this is probably going to shift to Zoom, and that's going to be the default at least for a while. So I'm going to lean
Hmm.
into it. And so it was also a product that people loved. It's a really good workout, and then also the way that she made people feel in class, feeling super motivated, really focused
Yep.
on community. It was just sort of like a really great product. I
Uh-huh.
think like one of the magic moments for her was realizing that virtual can actually be like a much better business for a bunch of
Sure.
reasons. So
Then in person.
than in person.
Yep.
And so a core component of that is that you don't have to be limited by physical space. So,
Yeah.
if you were teaching a cooking class or if you're teaching a fitness class, if you're doing it in person, you're limited by the physical space that you have. So you're limited to
Hmm.
20, 30, 40 people at max.
Yep.
And what she realized is that not only shifting to digital lets you serve a larger audience, but it really doesn't matter where they are. So they can be
Sure.
anywhere in the country or around the world,
Yep.
and the quality of the experience does not degrade that much with each person that you add. And so
Yeah.
it actually ends up just being more fun if you're in a
Yep.
class with 60 people versus 50
Yeah.
people or
It's
100
like
people.
Peloton. Like when you go on a run and there's 300 people and you're getting like random high fives, it's like, "Oh, this is really cool." And then like I've had it before where the internet cuts out. I'm like really quickly it becomes not fun. Like when it's just me on a treadmill running, I'm like, "Oh yeah, this isn't very fun, is it?" But when you have other people, there's an energy even if it's digital.
Yeah, and there was something to being in that Zoom where there was 1,000 other people and you're all seeing each other. And
Yeah.
you're in your home working out and you see this sea of faces and everyone's
Yeah.
doing the same thing. It's kind of this really like crazy social experience where you feel like you're in the
Yep.
future and you're in the movie that you're working out
Yep.
with many people
Yeah.
virtually. And so that was really interesting. And I think the other thing that really clicked for her, and just in thinking about this and like what we've seen, is that the business is just much more profitable in the sense
Yeah.
that you don't have to pay rent, you don't have to pay
Overhead.
physical space,
Yeah.
you don't have overhead. Like you can essentially be like, a person who is also a company or like has a
Uh-huh.
product that's also a company with a limited set of tools. The problem that she was running into is that she was hacking together all these tools and it was just
Yep.
like making her life hell to pull this thing
Yeah.
off. So
She becomes essentially the tech department for a virtual class that she's running, which is where Airsubs kind of fits in.
exactly. So, she has to build a website where people can go to the event. She has to integrate signups. She has to integrate
Payment
a
processing. Yeah.
payment process. She has to, create Zoom links and meeting links, and she has to distribute them via
And
email.
then
She has
10% of the people are like, my connection is fuzzy. What do I do? And it's like, she's working out and she's like, sorry, can't help you.
Yeah, exactly. And so, what we saw is that there's a way to build a product that solves those problems and makes
Hmm.
it much easier to host a virtual event and earn money, but where it's fun. Like you can focus on the things that matter, which are
Yep.
doing a fun class or doing a fun event and earning money and not worry about the technology or the payments or some of the business stuff.
Yep.
We kind of make it incredibly simple to do this. So like what is Airsubs? It basically helps creators, but a lot of food creators host virtual events and earn money. And the most common thing we're seeing is food creators hosting Zoom cooking classes and baking
Sure.
classes. And we've seen people get creative with virtual cookbook tours and other events. And we just kind of make it easy to get started, so you can
Yep.
focus on that fun stuff. And again, it lets you set up a page, sell spots, handle ticketing, confirmation emails, reminder emails,
Yep.
automatically create Zoom links, sell in different ways. You can sell a membership, you can sell a package of classes, you can sell gift cards. It helps you build up an email list and then market the classes. It's essentially like a virtual event business in a box.
Yeah. So is it built on top of Zoom in a way where like you sign up for your own Zoom account, you enter in your credentials for Zoom, and then through API access, Airsubs kind of does what it needs to do. So then you essentially are going in and pressing like start on a Zoom event, and then people show up, or how how much do you have to be involved in kind of the setup process with it?
Yeah, it's super simple. So our goal is to make it incredibly easy and have it so you can set this up in less than 5 minutes.
Sure.
So, with Zoom specifically, you click one button and it hooks up your Zoom account, and then you
Hmm.
never have to worry about anything else again. Like
Hmm.
you will add a class that you want to teach, and it'll automatically create the Zoom link. And when people sign up, they'll automatically get the confirmation email. The confirmation email has the right Zoom link, and
Cool.
so it just kind of takes all that stuff off your plate. But
Yeah.
with cooking classes specifically, there's like a few big picture themes that we're seeing.
Hmm.
So the first is that like this is the perfect moment to run virtual cooking classes
Yeah.
just because they're super fun. And if you imagine what the pandemic's been like, it's just been really isolating for a lot of people. Like no matter
Yep.
where you are in the country or where you are in the world, at one point you were in some version of isolation, distancing, lockdown. And so,
Yep.
like, there's just so much human connection missing. And so,
Hmm.
it's a great way to get together and learn something and make something delicious. And people are cooking so much more than they ever have.
Right.
And in talking to so many folks like in and around food, it's just interesting to see. like there's just this huge surge in interest and demand. I mean, like
Yeah.
we have a lot of folks who are really having some very successful bread making classes and really
Sure.
crushing it with sourdough, and like
Yeah,
sourdough
yeah, yeah. Totally.
had its moment
Yeah,
in the last year, and so it's just brought people so much joy. Where if you're stuck in your house and you haven't seen someone in so long,
yeah,
it's like really refreshing to get together and be able to cook something with a room full of people, and also with someone who you admire and you look up to and whose recipes you've been making for a long time.
yep,
And then, for the people who are teaching the classes, it's also really fun. Alexander Stafford, Ali Stafford, was one of the first people to start teaching on Airsubs. And what she told me was that she feels like it's like a party that she's
yeah, yeah.
going to, or that she's
Like a
hosting.
digital party. Yeah.
But it's kind of nice in that she doesn't have to get all of the stuff there and like cook for a
Yep,
million people. And so, it's just kind of brought people a lot of joy. And then, the other thing that we're seeing is, uh, it's also just been like scale really well, and it's pretty lucrative. So we talked about
yeah.
this a little bit with like why a virtual class is better than an in-person class. But,
Mhm.
we're seeing people consistently host these Zoom cooking classes, with 100, 200 people in them, and
Yep,
they're charging usually somewhere between $25 and $50 a head.
yep,
And so it just ends up kind of being this really lucrative thing where the price point is still really accessible for people who want to take the classes,
yep.
and the experience, the quality is really high. But when you get that many people together and it's at that accessible price point, and you aren't limited by by scale,
Yeah,
it can just be like really really lucrative.
yep.
And then I think the other thing that we're seeing is that people are charging for these events in a different way. So in the old world, if you were going to do a cooking class, like a lot of it would just be like individual tickets. So
Mm,
you pay
mhm.
25 or $50 and you'd show up for a class, and not that many people would do cooking classes that often. So
Yeah,
many people have done in-person cooking classes. Like I've done sur la table in New York.
yep,
It's like more feels like more of a special occasion, but when it's virtual, it's just so much easier that the frequency with which people want to take the classes and like the fun, casual atmosphere of doing the classes makes it so that people want to do it more and more consistently. And so we have folks who are teaching like 2 to 4 classes a month.
sure.
And when you are doing it at that level of frequency, that is amenable to building it into a community or with a
Recurring.
yeah, with a
Yeah,
membership.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So people pay $25 a month, and you just get access to the premium cooking class that is gonna happen once a week at Wednesdays at noon or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And so you save yourself a spot in every cooking class. And then the other really creative thing that folks have done, that a bunch of the creators we're working with have done, is they're essentially recording all of these live classes. And so they're building up this big video library of all these classes they've taught previously.
Hmm,
And so when someone signs up for a membership, they do save themselves a spot in all the live classes. But then they
yeah.
also get to go back and watch all the classes that have been taught previously. And every time that you teach a class, you're essentially adding to this big library
Yeah.
of classes you've taught previously. And so it's sort of this concept of, make money while you sleep, or,
Yep.
spend
And
time.
people could sign up and they could join and be a part of that and immediately have access kind of on demand.
Exactly. Right. So like you
Yep.
teach it once and then you continue to sell it over a really long period of time. And
Yep.
the memberships that people have launched have been really interesting, just because it's created this recurring revenue for people. And then there's a bunch of reasons. I mean, Food Blogger Pro, like I think you understand
Yeah.
the power of subscriptions and memberships. It's just like a really interesting business model, where you're deeply aligned with
Uh-huh.
your customer, where they have an incentive to use the product more and more over time. And then it's really great to have that steady recurring revenue where you can predict how much
Right.
revenue is going to come in per month, and you can count on it and you can start to understand it, and it grows over time. And you have this really big, sort of asset that's growing over time. And it gives you just enormous freedom and peace of mind to know that you have
Sure.
this consistent revenue.